The clock read 5 a.m. when Elara glided through the revolving glass doors of the Orion Building, headquarters of quantum dynamics. At 48 years old, Elara was a practically invisible figure to most of the staff, the cleaner who swept through the shadows before the morning sun could banish them. Her gray uniform, hair pulled back into a simple bun, and the soft rattle of her cleaning cart on the polished marble were the only clues to her presence. Elara took pride in her work. She cherished the quiet, pre-dawn hours when the building seemed to breathe in peace. For nearly 2 decades, she had been Orion's silent pillar, a background figure in a whirl of important lives. She had grown accustomed to her invisibility and, in a way, preferred it. After all, she had her own reasons for dwelling in the shadows. That morning, however, a different kind of tension already hung in the air. Elara noticed the hurried footsteps, the clipped conversations, and the worried glances exchanged across desks. Near the elevator, she overheard snippets of anxious chatter. The CEO's master system just crashed. He's in the middle of a critical investor call, a young man whispered to a colleague, eyes wide with alarm. He's going to flip out, the other replied, shaking his head. Worst possible timing. A spark of curiosity ignited in Elara, but she didn't let it show. She continued her routine, emptying waste bins and wiping down surfaces. She knew better than to get involved in the corporate dramas unfolding on the upper floors. She was just the cleaner, or at least, that's what everyone thought. As she polished the conference room windows, Elara caught sight of the CEO, Mr. Malcolm, pacing furiously in his office, his face red and his gestures sharp. Outside his door, a young assistant, Chloe, hovered nervously, clutching a tablet to her chest. Elara watched for a moment, then moved on. Over the years, she had learned that no matter how important someone considered themselves, they all left the same coffee stains on their desks. There was a strange peace in that simple truth. But as the minutes ticked by, the tension in the air thickened. IT specialists in crisp shirts and anxious expressions scurried past her. Elara paused at the break room doorway, her mop still in hand, as she watched a group gathered around a laptop. "It's a complete lockout," one of them said, his voice tight. "We've never seen anything like this before. It's like the system is fighting back." "Can you fix it?" another demanded. "We're trying," he replied, fingers flying over the keys, "but it's encrypted in a way that makes no sense. This isn't just a crash, it's a deliberate hack." Elara's eyes narrowed. A deliberate hack. She hadn't expected that. But she also knew better than anyone that systems, like people, often had hidden vulnerabilities. She had learned that lesson long ago. Her mind drifted back to the life she'd left behind, to the years she spent hunched over circuit boards and codebooks, her mind alive with possibilities. Before life had swept her onto a different path, she had studied software engineering at a small city college. She loved the elegant logic of it all, the way pieces fit together like a puzzle waiting to be solved. But dreams don't always survive reality, and she had set aside her ambitions to raise her son alone when his father disappeared without a trace. The memory of those years was a quiet ache she carried with her daily. She had never told anyone at Quantum Dynamics about the person she used to be. Here, she was Elara, the cleaner, reliable, invisible, safe. She turned back to her cleaning cart, dipping her mop in the bucket, but her mind was already ticking through possibilities. She didn't have access to their systems, of course, but she understood how these things worked. And if the specialists were at a loss, maybe, just maybe, she could help. Elara moved on to the executive floor, where the tension was even thicker. Phones rang, people whispered in corners, and the air was charged with fear. Elara worked quietly, but she couldn't help noticing the desperate energy buzzing in the hall. At the end of the corridor, she paused outside the CEO's office. She could hear him shouting, "We're about to lose the biggest deal of the year because of this. Do whatever it takes to get it back up now." Chloe, the young assistant outside the door, caught Elara's eye and offered her a small, nervous smile. Elara gave a reassuring nod in return. She knew Chloe, she was one of the few who actually remembered her name. As Elara resumed mopping, her mind drifted back to the nights she'd spent in her tiny apartment, tinkering with old computers she'd rescued from the trash. She'd never lost her love for the dance of numbers and logic, even if the world had told her she didn't belong in it anymore. Those nights had been her own private rebellion against a world that had decided she was only ever going to be a cleaner. A commotion in the hallway snapped her out of her thoughts. The IT specialists were arguing now, their voices rising. "I'm telling you, we're out of options," one of them said, his voice cracking with frustration. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. Elara set her mop aside. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her face remained calm. She knew she should stay out of it, but something inside her wouldn't let her. She couldn't bear to watch them struggle when she could see the path so clearly in her mind. Taking a deep breath, she approached the group. "Excuse me," she said softly. They all turned to stare at her, as if she had spoken in another language. Elara swallowed her nerves and said, "I know I'm just the cleaner, but I used to know a bit about computers. Maybe I can help." The IT lead, a man with slicked back hair and expensive shoes, gave a short, incredulous laugh. "You? With all due respect, ma'am, this is way beyond your pay grade." Elara nodded, understanding. "I know, but maybe just let me try. It won't cost you anything to let me look." For a moment, there was silence. Then Chloe stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Let her try," she said. "We've tried everything else." The IT lead hesitated, then finally, with a resigned sigh, stepped aside. Elara walked forward, her hands shaking slightly as she looked at the laptop screen. And as she stood there, surrounded by doubt and disbelief, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, a spark of possibility, the quiet thrill of knowing she might just have the answer everyone else had overlooked. Elara took a steadying breath and slid into the chair before the laptop, feeling the weight of every pair of eyes in the room. Her hands hovered over the keyboard, trembling for a moment before she set her jaw. She quickly scanned the screen, her mind parsing lines of code and error messages that would have once been intimidating but now seemed like an old language she still understood. The IT lead hovered over her shoulder, clearly skeptical, but Elara shut out the noise. She focused on the familiar rhythm of command lines, of troubleshooting step by step. It all came flooding back to her, those long nights hunched over second-hand computers, the thrill of finding solutions no one else could see. She began to type, carefully checking for patterns that didn't make sense. In that moment, she wasn't just a cleaner, she was the woman she used to be, the woman she'd kept hidden for far too long. Around her, the room grew quiet, the tension thick with disbelief and curiosity. The CEO, Mr. Malcolm, paced behind her, muttering to himself as he glanced at the large screen displaying the company's critical metrics. Each number represented millions of dollars, and Elara could feel the weight of that responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. She refused to let it crack her composure. She worked quickly, her eyes darting across the screen, cross-referencing files and logs, her brain ticking like a well-oiled machine. She could see the hidden pathways of the hack, could sense the malicious code woven like a spider's web across their system. "I see you," she whispered to herself as she traced the threads of the breach, her voice barely audible above the hum of fluorescent lights. "I see what you're trying to do." She wouldn't let this system fall, not on her watch. Chloe, the young assistant who had believed in her, stood at her side, holding her breath as she watched Elara work. "Can you really fix it?" she whispered. Elara didn't look up, but she nodded once, a quiet confidence settling over her. Her fingers moved faster now, pulling up command prompts and system logs. She spotted an unfamiliar encryption pattern that the IT team had missed, an anomaly that had been disguised as normal traffic. It was clever, she thought, but not clever enough. She began working to isolate the malicious code, typing commands with a calm certainty that came from years of hidden practice. She didn't notice the growing crowd behind her, the employees who had gathered to see what the cleaner was doing in the middle of their crisis. All she saw was the puzzle in front of her, and she knew she was close to cracking it. The IT lead finally leaned in, his skepticism shifting to something closer to respect. "Where did you learn to do this?" he asked, his voice low. Elara didn't answer. She didn't want to tell him about the nights she'd spent alone, teaching herself line by line, driven by curiosity and necessity. She didn't want to talk about the job she'd almost gotten years ago as a systems engineer, the one she had to give up when her son was born. She just kept typing, tracing the path of the code back to its source. The room was hushed, the only sound the clicking of keys and the occasional intake of breath as she reached a critical point in the process. Elara paused, her fingers hovering. She knew this next step was make or break. She closed her eyes for just a second, gathering her courage, then pressed enter. The screen flickered, and for a moment, Elara feared she'd pushed too hard, that the system would collapse under her hands. But then, lines of text began to appear, scrolling rapidly as the system responded to her commands. She could feel the energy in the room shift, first confusion, then hope. Chloe let out a shaky breath, her eyes wide. "You're doing it," she said. Elara nodded, her heart pounding but her hands steady. She worked methodically, isolating each corrupted file, cleaning them one by one. With each success, the system's health improved, the metrics stabilizing on the CEO's big screen. Elara's mind was a quiet storm, her thoughts focused entirely on the task. She felt alive in a way she hadn't for years. This was who she was, she realized, not just a cleaner, not just a woman who cleaned up after others. She was a problem solver, a protector. Finally, after what felt like hours but had only been minutes, Elara leaned back, her fingers leaving the keyboard. The system was stable. The CEO's metrics blinked, the critical call data recovered and flowing again. A stunned silence filled the room as Elara looked up, her calm eyes meeting Mr. Malcolm's. He stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. "You did it," he said, his voice soft, almost reverent. Elara nodded, feeling the weight of the moment around her. The IT specialists exchanged glances of amazement, their earlier doubts washed away by the undeniable results on the screen. Chloe was beaming with pride, her smile wide and genuine. Elara stood slowly, brushing off her uniform, feeling the rush of adrenaline slowly fade. She'd done what she had come to do. She'd saved them all in a way none of them had expected. Elara stood there, breathing heavily, as the weight of what she'd accomplished slowly settled around her like a warm blanket. The CEO's eyes were still locked on hers, a mixture of disbelief and wonder in his expression. How did you know how to do that?" he finally asked. Elara hesitated for a moment, then gave a small shrug. "I used to work with systems like this a long time ago," she said simply. She didn't want to get into the details, the years she'd spent studying, the dreams she'd put on hold to raise her son, the quiet nights spent tinkering on battered computers no one else wanted. Those things were hers alone. But in that moment, standing in the middle of the bustling office with everyone staring at her, she realized that she no longer had to hide that part of herself. She was more than the cleaner they saw every day. Chloe was the first to break the silence, her voice bright with excitement. "Elara, you saved the entire company today," she said. A ripple of agreement spread through the small crowd. Even the IT lead, who had doubted her just moments before, stepped forward and gave her a respectful nod. "I underestimated you," he admitted. Elara gave a small, self-deprecating smile. "Most people do," she said softly, but there was no bitterness in her voice, just a quiet acceptance of the way life had shaped her. She picked up her mop, the tool that had defined her in this place for so long, and gave it a thoughtful look. It was strange, she realized, how easily people fit others into neat little boxes. She had been the cleaner for so long, it was as if everyone had forgotten that she had a mind, and a past, and a future too. Mr. Malcolm cleared his throat, his expression shifting from shock to something more thoughtful. "Elara," he said, his voice firm but kind. "We need someone like you on our team." "Officially." Elara blinked in surprise. "Sir?" she asked. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I've seen enough to know that your talent is wasted on mops and buckets. We're always looking for people who can see what others miss, people who can do the impossible. If you're interested, I'd like to offer you a position in IT. You wouldn't have to hide who you are anymore." For a moment, Elara couldn't speak. Her whole life she'd been told that her dreams were unrealistic, that her place was in the background. And now, here she was, being offered a chance to step into the light. She swallowed, her heart thudding in her chest, and managed a small smile. "I'd like that very much," she said. The room seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief and admiration. Chloe was grinning like a child on Christmas morning, and the IT team looked at her with new respect. Elara felt a swell of pride, but also a quiet humility. She knew how rare this moment was, and how hard she'd worked, even in silence, to be ready for it. She put her mop back on her cart and gave it a gentle pat, as if to say goodbye to the role that had kept her grounded for so long. Then she turned back to Mr. Malcolm, her shoulders straight, her chin lifted just a little higher. "Where do you want me to start?" she asked. Mr. Malcolm gave her a small smile in return. "We'll set up a meeting this afternoon," he said. "For now, take a break. You've more than earned it." As she left the office, the hallway that had once felt so narrow and confining now seemed to stretch open before her, full of new possibilities. She walked past desks where people had once barely looked up from their screens, and now they watched her with wide eyes and nods of respect. Chloe walked beside her, her face still lit up with excitement. "I always knew there was something special about you, Elara," she said. Elara chuckled softly. "Thank you, Chloe. That means a lot." She thought about the years she'd spent trying to make ends meet, the dreams she'd buried under practicalities and responsibilities. And she realized that maybe those dreams had just been waiting for the right moment to bloom. She paused at the break room, the familiar smell of coffee and warm pastries drifting in the air, and took a deep breath. Today was the start of something new. She found a quiet spot by the window where she could see the city stretching out below. The sunlight glinted off the glass buildings, and for the first time in years, Elara felt like she was part of it all. She pulled out her phone and dialed her son's number, her fingers shaking with excitement. "Mama," he said when he picked up, "how's work today?" Elara smiled, her eyes shining. It's different," she said, her voice warm with hope. "I think I'm finally going to get a chance to do what I've always wanted." Her son was silent for a moment, then he said softly, "I'm so proud of you, Mama." Elara closed her eyes, letting his words sink into her heart. "Thank you," she whispered. She ended the call and slipped the phone back into her pocket. Outside the window, the world felt wide and waiting, and she was finally ready to meet it. Elara's new chapter, ascent and challenges. The days that followed were a whirlwind for Elara. Her early morning routine, filled with quiet solitude and the swish of her mop, was replaced by a new world of glowing screens and intricate code. Mr. Malcolm, the CEO, proved true to his word. Instead of a formal, intimidating interview, he invited her for coffee, where they conversed about her past experience and her long-deferred aspirations. Elara, for the first time in years, felt truly seen. Mr. Malcolm not only listened, he asked insightful questions, demonstrating genuine respect for her journey and her abilities. He revealed himself as a visionary leader, capable of seeing beyond appearances and valuing talent wherever it manifested. Her new role was officially Systems Security Consultant. It was a title that felt weighty for the former cleaner, but it resonated with the true essence of her capabilities. She was assigned to Chloe's team, the young assistant who had believed in her. Chloe, now her colleague, became her biggest champion, helping her adapt to the new environment and introducing her to coworkers who had previously barely noticed her. The dynamic between them was a testament to Elara's humanity. Chloe, with her youthful energy and sincere admiration, served as a bridge between Elara and the corporate world she had avoided for so long. The transition wasn't without its challenges. Some of the IT specialists, those who had initially dismissed her, still regarded her with a hint of veiled skepticism. There were whispers in the hallways, silent questions about how the cleaner had ascended to such a high position. The IT lead, a man named David, though respectful after the incident, maintained a professional distance, still processing the turn of events. Elara felt the resistance, but she didn't care. She was back in her element. The nights she used to spend fixing old computers in her small apartment now served as her informal training, and she dedicated herself to mastering quantum dynamics' new tools and systems with the same passion as before. Her thirst for knowledge was insatiable, and she spent hours reading technical manuals, attending webinars, and experimenting in a test environment that the company readily provided. Her first major project was to fortify the company's defenses against future attacks. She delved into logs and network architectures, pinpointing the vulnerabilities the previous breach had exploited. Her approach was distinct from the others. While they sought complex, high-tech solutions, Elara possessed an innate intuition for the more subtle flaws, those that lay hidden in plain sight, like disguised coffee stains. She found the elegant logic of the systems, the way the pieces were meant to fit, and quickly recognized when something was amiss. She didn't limit herself to the technical aspects. Elara also understood the psychology behind attacks, how hackers exploited not just code, but also human vulnerabilities like phishing and social engineering. During one of her initial presentations to the IT team, Elara proposed a series of small, yet crucial, alterations to their security policy and network configuration. She clearly explained how the previous breach had exploited an seemingly innocuous encryption pattern that the IT team had overlooked, and how her solution, simple in its execution, would close the door to future incursions. The IT lead, David, listened intently, and by the end, genuine respect etched itself onto his face. "That's brilliant, Elara," he admitted. "Things we never thought to look for. You have a unique perspective." It was a quiet, yet invaluable, acknowledgement that began to break down the remaining barriers. Over time, Elara not only integrated into the team, but became an informal leader. Her ideas were innovative, her solutions effective, and her calmness under pressure was contagious. She didn't speak in complex technical jargon that no one understood. She translated complexity into simple terms, making cybersecurity accessible to everyone. Employees across Quantum Dynamics, from interns to managers, began seeking her out with their security concerns, trusting her discernment and patience. However, success brings its own challenges. Elara's visibility increased, and with it, the pressure. Local media began to publish the story of the cleaner who saved Quantum Dynamics, turning her into a kind of unlikely celebrity. She was invited for interviews on radio shows and tech podcasts. At first, Elara felt uncomfortable with the attention. She preferred anonymity, the quiet of the shadows. But Chloe encouraged her, "Elara, your story can inspire many people. It's important for you to share it." Elara, hesitantly, accepted a few invitations. In each interview, she spoke not only about bits and bytes, but about the importance of never underestimating anyone, of looking beyond the obvious, and about the resilience of dreams. She spoke about her son, who was her motivation, and about the joy of finding her purpose again. The responses were overwhelming. Women of all ages, especially those who felt their careers were stagnant or their talents overlooked, sent messages of support and gratitude. Her son, on the other end of the line, was the biggest source of her smile. Their calls became more frequent and filled with stories of her new daily life. He swelled with pride at her every small victory, and that propelled her forward. "You're changing the world, Mama," he once said, and his words warmed her heart. The quiet ache she had carried had diminished, replaced by a renewed sense of joy and purpose. One day, while Elara was working on a new intrusion detection system, she received an email. It was from a charity organization that promoted technology education for underprivileged women. They invited her to be the keynote speaker at their annual conference. It was a massive platform, and the thought of speaking to hundreds of people terrified her. But Elara thought of her son, of all the nights she had struggled to balance her ambitions with her responsibilities, and of the chance Mr. Malcolm had given her. She accepted. On the day of the conference, Elara, wearing an elegant silk dress but still with the simple bun that had become her trademark, walked onto the stage. The amphitheater was packed. Instead of starting with technical terms, she began her speech with the phrase, "I used to be a cleaner." A murmur rippled through the audience. She told her story with honesty and humility, the journey of a woman who learned the logic of code in secret, who buried her dreams for love, and who rescued them through persistence and an unexpected chance. She spoke about the importance of believing in yourself, even when no one else does, and about the need to look beyond appearances. At the end of her speech, the audience rose in a thunderous ovation. Many had tears in their eyes. Elara felt a lump in her throat. She was no longer just the cleaner, she had become an inspiration. Back at Quantum Dynamics, Elara no longer wore her gray uniform. Now, she dressed in sharper attire, but she kept her hair in its simple bun, a subtle reminder of where she came from. Sometimes, as she passed through one of the hallways she used to clean, she'd smile to herself. The Orion Building was no longer just the site of her invisible labor, it was the stage of her transformation. She continued to be the first to arrive at the office sometimes, not to clean, but to enjoy the silence and the opportunity to delve into new projects without interruption. Elara was no longer just the cleaner. She had become an essential part of quantum dynamics, a problem solver who saw beyond the obvious. And the world, which had once relegated her to the shadows, was now ready to see her shine. Her journey, from an invisible existence to a life of purpose and recognition, served as a beacon of hope for so many others. Quantum dynamics prospered under her vigilance, and Elara's story became a legend within the company, a constant reminder that talent knows no bounds or predefined boxes.